All right, so I wanted to go over homework for 1-2, give you guys a little help. So this first question is, it tells you to look at this function over here, which is already written out, and you notice that it's got some closed circles on both sides, and it's asking you which of the x values have points in the graph. So literally, like on this graph, really, if we're talking about x values, it's asking, if you notice here, the domain. So this question is asking pretty much what is the domain, describe it. And the same thing here. It's asking what are the possible outputs. Remember, outputs are the same thing as your y values, so really we're just talking about the range. Okay, so domain and range is really what it's asking about. Okay, so the domain, if we're looking at the left side, it's the domain, the farthest point to the left is right there, right? So I'm going to draw a line kind of up and down to kind of show the domain or the limit here. The farthest limit to the right is right here. There's that point, the furthest to the right. Now, again, the domain, what are the x values, right? Well, the first x value to the left is -2. So the furthest point to the left is -2. The furthest x value to the right is 4. Because remember, when we describe domain, we always want to start on the left and then go to the right. Or start on the lowest number and then go to the right. Okay, so now if I'm going to actually write this with set-like notation, I'm going to put a comma in the middle of those two numbers. And if you remember from the video from Miss Menard, if I have a closed circle, that means I'm going to use a bracket. Okay, and I also have a closed circle over here, so I'm going to use a bracket. Okay, so now what's the range? Okay, well the range would go in the opposite direction, right? Will be an up and down vertical. Now again, start on the lowest value. The lowest point of the graph is the bottom here. So that would be from here to here at -1. And then the highest point is right there. So you can see the top of that little curve. It's like right under 3, but this one's a little bit higher. You always go to the highest point on the line. So that'd be 3. Okay, so again, I treat it the same. So I know that my lowest point is -1. My highest point is 3. I put a comma. They both have closed circles, so I use brackets. Okay. Now, you just want to answer this question, like it's asking you, Ricky thinks the range is just -1 and just 0 and only 1 and only 2 and only 3. I'm not going to give you guys the answer, but I want you to think, if he thinks the range is only these numbers, what numbers are we forgetting about? There are more numbers than just -1 and 0 and even more than just -2. What numbers are in between there? So use that to kind of think about, is he right and why? Okay, and then here, what you're going to do in this next question is you're going to use this graph and make another function, however you want, whatever shape you want, a U, a line, a circle. It just has to have the same domain and the same range as this function. So whatever you want to make, just do it right here. Okay, I'm going to go over a few of these problems down here, starting with, let's say, this one here. Okay, so this one here, again, domain, we're going to start on the left. The leftmost point, the leftmost x value, is right here at -1. Okay, and then the furthest to the right is at +1. Okay, so remember I told you put the comma in between. On the left, I have a closed circle, so that's a bracket. But on the right, now I've got an open circle, so that means it'll never actually reach 1, never touch 1, so I put a parenthesis. Okay, now we'll do the same thing with the range. Range, we're going to start with the lowest x value, or sorry, lowest y value this time, because remember these are x, these are y, and the lowest y value is -1. Okay, then I'm going to go to the highest point of this graph, and that's the y value of 2. Same thing, comma here. Now the lowest value has the closed circle, so there I put the bracket. And the highest value has the open circle, so I'll put the parenthesis. Okay, so that's how you do those. Now on this next set of problems, the difference here is that you're still finding the domain and the range for each of the following functions, but you're going to write your answers using inequality symbols this time, instead of using the set notation where we use the brackets and parentheses. Okay, so you're still looking for the same values though, so let's still start with the same thing. And let's actually start here with this one, okay? So here, we're still going to look for the number to the farthest to the left, okay, or the lowest x value. What's the lowest x value for this line? Well, it's -1. What's the furthest x value? Well, if you remember from the video, whenever you see an arrow, that means infinity, right? And if it's going to the right, it's going to be positive infinity. Okay, so I need a little space in between here because when I use the inequality symbols, I'm going to need a little bit more space to write down all those symbols. Now, we're talking about domain, so that means in the middle, I'm going to write x. Now, for every time you use these and you have something on the left and something on the right, I'm always going to write it in this direction, in this kind of less than direction. Okay, because you want the x to be greater than the lowest value, but also less than the biggest value. So that's how you always write it in this direction, kind of pointing to the left. But now we need to pay attention to, first of all, this is a closed circle. If it's a closed circle, I'm sorry, an open circle. If it's an open circle, we're not going to put the equal sign underneath. So it won't be less than or equal. And the same thing, if it's infinity, it's almost like it's a parenthesis, right? We would not use the equal sign. So it's x, what this says is x is greater than -1, or anything in between -1, and then but is less than infinity. Now it really does keep on just going forever. Now when we use infinity in this way, I could just write x is greater than -1. And that's also acceptable. Okay? This is kind of the way you would do it no matter what the situation is, but if it's just infinity, you could just include the one with the number. Okay? All right, so now the range. The range, again, I start at the lowest y value, which is -1. And then I'm going to go to the highest, which again, I'm hitting an arrow, so it's treated the same way. The only difference now is that we're talking about y, so put y in the middle, and it still has the same idea. I still put less than, less than. Is there any closed circles? Nope. So I just leave it like that. I don't put a line underneath. Okay. Now I will show you this one, just so you kind of get an idea of the difference between when you have an arrow and when you don't. And also, again, this could be just y is greater than -1. Okay. Both acceptable answers. Okay, so now this one, domain to the left, -1. Domain to the right, +1. Okay, and in the middle, I'm gonna leave a little bit more room. I'm gonna leave myself enough room here. So we'll put 1 way over here. Okay, in the middle we put the x. Now on the left we have a closed circle, so that means I'm gonna put less than. And on the right I've got a closed circle. So that's when I put the equal than sign. So x is greater than -1. So it's greater than this point, but it's also less than 1, so it's less than this point. So it's basically anything in between -1 and 1. X can be that number. Now the next one, let me just start up by writing y, so I don't forget, leave room. Now remember, I start with the lowest number, so that means I need to go to the bottom, which is -1, and go up to the highest y value, which in this case happens to be 2. Okay, so now at -1, I have a closed dot, so I'll use less than or equal because it has a closed dot. And when I get to the top, I have an open dot, so then I use just less than. Okay, so same idea, just like this one, where you do the left and to the right, and then the range you do the bottom and the top. But you're just using equal. You're either using an equal sign or you're not using an equal sign. If it's like a parenthesis situation, don't use the equal. If it's a bracket situation, you use the equal. So it's like the same, it's just a different way of writing it. Now in this case, I can't just say y equals or is greater than -1 or y is less than -2. I need to include both numbers in this case. But if it has an infinity on one side, then you can do this. Okay? So let's go to the back. I'm going to go over this one up here. Because this one's just kind of a really unique situation. It's called a piecewise function, and it's called a piecewise because it's like broken up into pieces. It's almost like I took one line that went straight across, and then I cut it here, and I brought that piece down here, and then I cut it again, and I brought that piece down here, and it's like I just separated them. Okay, so it's the same idea, but it's just separated. So let's just say that I brought this line back up here, right? It's like I just move that piece back up to the top, right? And I take this piece and I move it back up here. Okay? It's basically like if I put all the pieces together, I get one complete line. And that line starts, when we're talking about domain, on the left at -3. Now this doesn't say I have to use inequality, so I'm just going to use set notation. And if I go all the way to the right, which is this point here, my furthest point to the right is 3. And notice how this line, even though it's kind of broken up, if I go from start at -3 and ends at -2, it continues again at -2 here and goes to the right to 1 and then continues at 1 down here and goes all the way. So it's continuous. It does go all the way through. It's just cut up. So here I put the comma. On the left I have a closed circle, so bracket. On the right I have an open, so it's parenthesis. Now the range is going to be a whole lot different because as I start on the bottom, my lowest value is -2. But the problem is that as I go from this line to this line, there's a gap. There's no like connection between these two lines. So there's nothing in between. So I'm not going to include the -1 or the 0 in between all that. Okay, so I wouldn't use inequality symbols or brackets in this case. Here, it's only at -2. If you notice, this line goes straight across. It's only at -2. And then this line, there's a big gap, and then this line is only 1. And then another gap goes up, and then this line is only 3. So if it's only those numbers, I'm going to treat it like the first one, or like when they're dots. Actually, I'll go back and talk about this type of example when you only have dots. And that was an example that Miss Menard went over. When you only have points, you just list out the numbers. So go back and check that out. Okay, so here, if I only list numbers, squiggly brackets. Okay. All right, I'm on Zoom help from 9:30 to 12 every morning on the school days if you need more help. Otherwise, see you guys later.